Welcome to Neighbor. My name is Lynn Coram. I'm your host today. And today my guest is Joe Amico, Reverend Joe Amico. Welcome, and I'm so glad you could share this time with us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We like to start our shows with you telling us a little bit about yourself. So how would you describe yourself, or where, your adventures in life?
Well, my adventures, there's lots of those.
Yeah.
But, I really like to start out by saying I'm a son, I'm a father, I'm a brother, I'm a grandfather, and I'm a partner. And so that's more who I am. But then there's things I've done. I've traveled all across the country. I've been a pastor of churches. I've worked in the mental health and addictions field, and a number of other little things, but those are the major things.
Those are the major. And you came to Brattleboro and Vermont, New Hampshire from
California.
It was an interesting trip across the country.
It certainly was. We had to move 6 cars and 4 dogs, so it was a very exciting trip.
Did you do that in one trip?
Well, we did. We had actually we have antique cars, which came under cover on a separate carrier. The same as when you move all your goods on a large moving van. But we each drove a car with 2 dogs in it, and it took us 5 days to get from California to New Hampshire.
And you're glad you're here?
I am ecstatic to be back in New England. I'm a native New Englander, grew up on the North Shore of Boston, and I just love being back in the hills. Back in the hills.
And the climate is suitable? The winter was not a problem, I understand.
Well, this was a mild winter, and I had lived for 17 years in Wisconsin and 10 years in Minnesota.
That will do you in.
So this is mild. This is nothing compared to that.
I know. People, talk to people from Buffalo or something, and they say, you don't know anything about snow or wind.
Right.
Yeah. So you are presently, one of your jobs, and you have many jobs, or at least 2 major ones I know about, is that you are the minister of the First Congregational Church in West Brattleboro.
Correct.
And you sort of fell into our lap. We, also as a member of that church, our minister had just left, surprised everybody and left. And I have to tell you, I think I might have told you this, Joe, that when we were meeting with the state,
conference minister?
The conference minister, thank you. She said, well, we have this guy who just said he wants to move out here and would like a church part-time, and I'm there. And, I said, oh, this is just too good to be true. I mean, it's probably won't work. I was kind of negative about the whole thing. But it has turned out to be a great service for in both our ways.
It's been great for me as well. One of the things that I tell people, my philosophy in life is that God opens doors and I walk through them. That with the exception of the first 17 years that I served churches as a pastor, everything I've done the last 25 years has really been things that I didn't necessarily plan to do or looked for, but they've been there and they've all been blessings.
And what kind of a person becomes a minister? What draws a person to the ministry?
Well, that really varies for different people. I can only talk for myself. And in terms of my own call, really started when I was like in junior high. And, many teenagers feel that kind of confusing time, not knowing where to go, what to do, wanting attention, wanting to be affirmed for who they are. And at that particular time in my life, my parents were not attending church anywhere, and the only church in our neighborhood happened to be a Methodist church, and I started going with my friends to that church, and I discovered that people just really affirmed me for doing things. Like I would show up early on Sunday morning and fold the bulletins, and people would just praise me for that. And I liked to play the organ, and so they would ask me to play the organ for Sunday school, and I would get praise for that. And so it just made me feel good. And so I had decided, yes, valued is a good word. And so by freshman year of high school, I had decided that I wanted to be a minister. Because if the church could do that for me, I wanted to be able to do that for other people.
Mm-hmm. Well, it certainly is a place where you go expecting to be supported and valued and, find community, basically. But you're also a counselor.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we can talk on two sides you have of that issue, but a counselor is just being a counselor, but also is being the combination of minister and a counselor. If you could tell us on your views on that.
Well, it's, again, when I say that God opens doors and I walk through them, the way I got into this field is that one of the churches I served in Wisconsin, there was an adolescent alcohol and drug program had opened while I was on vacation. Came home and I saw the article in the newspaper about it. And I had listened to a few fifth steps, which is something that chaplains or clergy often do in a 12-step process. And I had done a lot of youth work. I had been conference youth coordinator for our denomination for 7 years. And I walked in and just said, if you need some help, if I could, I have a lot of experience with youth, let me know. In the next 2 days, I listened to 2 fifth steps of 2 of the youth in that organization. And the director came out and said, we need a chaplain. Could you be our chaplain? I said, well, I have to ask my parish. And I went back to the church, and the church said they saw that as a real outreach to the community. And so I began as a chaplain for that program, went on to become a director of an adolescent alcohol and drug program. Later on became a counselor in another program. And so I've been in the field of mental health and addictions for the last 25 years in various capacities.
Yeah. Now, when you counsel people as a minister, when you're asked to be a chaplain, that they're coming to you with a different expectation.
Exactly.
As opposed to just being a counselor.
And I've done both. I've had a private counseling practice as well. And so when folks, one of the things that I would say to folks if they're looking to get counseling from a pastor is to recognize that not all pastors have that expertise. Pastors have different experiences and different skill sets and abilities. And counseling isn't something that they necessarily teach in seminary. So they shouldn't expect that every pastor can be the kind of counselor that they might get if they went to a counselor's office. And hopefully most pastors should know their own limitations, and when they reach a point be able to say to someone in their parish, well, I think I need to refer you to a professional counselor for that. And they shouldn't take that as a rejection. They should look at that as the pastor having good boundaries and knowing what that pastor is able to do and what someone else can do better for that individual.
Yeah, and but can you separate amongst yourself treating someone who comes in knowing that you're basically a minister and a counselor as opposed to someone who's looking just for counseling? How do you separate, how you would separate that in your own mind?
I don't know that I do, because one of the things that, even when I had a private counseling practice and I had folks that weren't from any particular religious group, I would share with them that I still see spirituality as a part of the whole person. So it's hard for me to be able to talk with folks even about their mental health issues or addiction issues without talking about spirituality. So I think that's a part of who we are as a whole person, and it's an important piece.
Okay. Yeah, well, it certainly is an important piece. I wonder if people think of it going into it. Maybe that's why they realize they need some outside help like that.
Well, I can say it from a couple different perspectives. One is, I will say, when I started doing that work with the adolescent program, and I saw the difference between the kids in the adolescent program, most of whom came off the streets, as opposed to my confirmation class, who all had to be there because their parents made them come. And I saw the kids in the treatment program being much hungrier for spirituality and for understanding more about what God was or what spiritual things were about. And I saw that as a real mission, a real, more evangelical, if you will, than working with my own youth in a confirmation class.
Could that be because if you bring that spirituality piece in or a God piece in, that lets a person know that you sort of feel like you're not alone in the world. And I think a lot of adolescents feel they're alone.
Very much so, and so there is that sense of community. So that's certainly one of the things that I think churches and religious groups provide for folks that they otherwise wouldn't have. That's very important, part of a component. But I also think, one of the things that AA talked about, and way back in the early days, was that if you take the drink out of the person, it leaves an empty void, and you have to fill it up with something. And that was the purpose of spirituality in the early days in the 12-step programs. And that's why clergy and chaplains were all part of doing fifth steps, because that fifth step is admitted to God, another person, and ourselves, the exact nature of our wrongs. So it's finding...
Go ahead.
It's finding something to fill that void. So when folks feel that they have a void in their lives, if they haven't been part of a religion, maybe it's that spiritual piece that they're lacking and need to be looking for.
Certainly something to think about, and an aspect that I don't think I typically would think about when I think of counseling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think of counseling as sort of, you examine yourself and you try to heal yourself or make decisions that will benefit you. Mm-hmm. But to ask for that outside guidance piece, mm-hmm. or you're not alone piece.
I think that's the key, of knowing that you're not alone. And,
mm-hmm.
And I think, the other place that was really clearly for me from the other side of the fence is that for the years that I was a pastor in a small town, I would get a lot of funerals of the folks that weren't a member of any church. Because the other churches in town wouldn't do non-church funerals. There was
mm-hmm.
They belonged to particular denominations where the rule was that the pastors only officiated at members of
mm-hmm.
churches, and so and I always felt badly for the folks who had no church or no religion, because when I did a funeral for someone in the church, we had our faith to hold on to. I had some words of comfort that made a lot of sense. But when it was folks who were non-churched, I always felt sad for them because they didn't have their faith to help them with their grief.
Yeah. Would you use the same words for them?
I would use the same words, but I would usually have a little different spin on them, if you
mm-hmm.
will.
Yeah. And it's hard. I would think that if you don't know the person, it's really hard to say those kinds,
mm-hmm.
to know what's really going to mean something to the family and so forth.
Well, certainly it's different when, especially in the Christian faith, when we have that whole thing about resurrection. And so to be able to talk about that at a member's funeral and be able to talk about what we believe in terms of resurrection, it's a whole different situation when you're talking with someone who doesn't have that background.
Yeah. Well, that segues us into the idea of church attendance or membership and what churches can offer. And this is pretty much considered, one of the most unchurched areas of the country.
The most unchurched.
The most. I was being kind.
Vermont's at the bottom of the list of the 50 states.
Yeah, and that's according to the Gallup poll.
Mm-hmm.
23% of Vermont residents attend church frequently, it says.
Mm-hmm.
One has to sort of sit back and wonder what that's about.
Mm-hmm.
Why, and also given that we're an older population,
mm-hmm.
that often older people tend to go to church more than younger people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting.
Yeah,
shed some light on that.
I don't know.
Or what you think?
Yeah, I'm certainly familiar with that study, and the study obviously didn't give us a lot of information about what else people were doing, so I don't know. But I think there's a number of factors there. One, I think Vermonters tend to be independent, mm-hmm. and so I think there's a part of that thing about not wanting to be a part of an organized religion. So
well, that could be, but I think that's a Vermont of 25, 30 years ago,
mm-hmm.
because the whole population has changed so much.
Uh-huh.
That I think this Vermont's independent thing is, we hear it a lot, and we say it, and people think it's that's what we are, but our politics and our structure and our society surely doesn't reflect it as much as I think we give ourselves credit for.
Well, and that may be true, because the other thing I wanted to talk about was alternative religions or alternative spiritual groups. Because, you know, there's, over the last few decades, there's certainly been a lot of different things in terms of like the New Age kind of things. There's been a lot of folks that have turned to more things like Buddhism and Shintoism and Taoism and all those kinds of Eastern religions. And I'm familiar, especially, for example, here in Brattleboro, I was impressed when I came here that here there truly is what's called an interfaith clergy association, whereas opposed to an ecumenical clergy association. Most communities I've been a part of are just ecumenical, meaning they're all Christian groups, and so it's just Christian clergy getting together. And here, there's truly an interfaith group. And there really are some different groups, like the Buddhist group and a spiritualist group, and you know and a Muslim are represented, and the Jews are represented. And so it may be that in Vermont, even though we may be the last in terms of church attendance, there might be other folks practicing spirituality, but doing it in a different way.
In a different way, yeah. You would think you'd have to have some understanding there to have a full life, and yet all those choices really, but finding out about them would be work. I mean, that would be a study in itself.
It would be. It would be interesting to have someone do that research.
Okay. We'll get some of those on there. If one decides to get involved in a church or in a spiritual group, you know, and all those needs can be met, what do you think, what are the responsibilities of joining such a group?
It really depends on the group. You know, I think the main issue for me, you mentioned the word that's key earlier, the word community. So it's being a part of a community, and communities have different expectations. There are certain communities, for example, that do have an expectation that folks tithe, which would be 10% of their incomes. Most groups expect folks to give something of their time and their talent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of being in a community.
Yeah, but a lot of folks don't understand that. Some folks seem to think that, you know, I've encountered over the last 20 years that there are 40 years. I'm getting
Watch
old.
that.
Yeah, that there are folks who just expect that they could just go to church and everything would be provided for them. They don't
Really?
understand that they have a responsibility if the church is going to be an organization and going to be able to continue. That's what community is all about.
And then if you become part of that community, what are the benefits that you get? I'm not that you have to feel like, you know, I'm only going to join it if I can evaluate it.
Yeah.
So, but what are those benefits that people get?
You know, well, again, for me, that sense of community, it's a sense of being valued, as you mentioned earlier, for being affirmed, for having folks who care about you and look after you. I think an important piece in, for example, in a church like ours, is that when someone hasn't been there, that regularly attends, and all of a sudden isn't there for a week or two, people begin to say, well, where's Jack?
What's
or
going
where's
on?
Sally? Yeah, well, let's give them a call. Let's drop by and see them. That, I think we all have a need for that. We have a need to be noticed. We have a need to be noticed when we're not around, so that folks miss us. That's an important component.
Yeah. Well, I know that when you call someone and say, you know, we missed you, how are you doing? And they'll just say, oh, this call has just made my day.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's nice to be able to do that for another person. And then when you need help, you know, the church is there for you. And we all need help at some point.
Well, I wanted to say, you know, another thing I think is important that folks need to realize if they're looking for a church is that people really do expect different things, and so different churches, different religions provide different things to different people. There is no one that does it all for everyone. There are some folks who really want to go to church just to get answers. And there's other folks who really like to go because it gives them something to think about. And they get challenged about what they think or what they believe. And so those are really two very opposite kinds of churches. And so folks really have to, I encourage folks to do shopping and to really kind of look around to find what gives them that, both the intellectual and the emotional need they have, as well as that sense of community that they need.
There's also people, the music is a huge part in church. You mentioned that you played the organ, and I think you have a decent voice. We've heard about that. We haven't had a chance as a church to, because you're so relatively new at this point, to explore that part. But what do you find as far as how important music is? And I was talking to someone else earlier that music is, when church in the 1600s, 1700s, music wasn't as big a thing.
Right.
And so there's a little history there.
Well, it was, but in a different kind of way, because in the 15s and 1600s, there wasn't the variety of music that we have today. It was still important, but it was a different variety. One of my other hats I've worn is that I've been on a conference staff for church development and church growth. And what the leaders in church development, church growth say, that the next important position after a pastor is the musician. Because music is one of the main reasons that folks will come to a church, stay at a church, or be part of a church. Because music is again, it's one of those universal languages, and it has a lot to say.
It also can take you back in your childhood, or the familiarity of some of the hymns and music is interesting.
Well, there's both there again.
Yeah.
There's for some folks there's that real sense of that tie to the past, and they love those good old hymns. And then for others, it's having music that's more singable and upbeat. So again, churches can be very different in terms of the kind of music that they have.
Yeah, and what determines how churches are often is just the community that gets built around them.
Exactly.
And what people who do. Now, we wanted to touch on just a little bit that right now sometimes it's called the culture wars or something, but the idea that Christianity has to be all accepting of all faiths and supportive, and I think we do a good job of doing that. Everybody can do what they want to do, and peace in any form is good. And yet yet in the media, sometimes anything that if Christian gets knocked down and put to the side, and yet the media would never do that to another religion. I'm thinking of the Muslims, that's the hot button religion right now. And you just wonder how much longer that standard will hold till people feel threatened by that or just get tired of it.
Well, there have been people threatened by that because there's been a lot of folks who've challenged that with the media and with our government. There's been that whole issue of there's been the states where they've taken down the 10 Commandments in some of the state legislatures or on government property, and anything else that smacks of religion. And yet, look at the way our country was founded. Our modern day country was founded by the Puritans escaping England because they wanted religious freedom. And yet, when they came here, imposed it upon everybody else. So it's like, so there's it's an interesting history.
It's an interesting way things work out. But it is the sense that 80% or higher of this country professes to be Christian in nature, and it's almost to the sense that you can't express that. You can't wear that on your sleeve, so to speak.
Who says?
Well, that's what I think. That's sort of the feeling I guess I get.
I think there's a difference between sharing your faith and saying who you are, and if you will, cramming it down other people's throats. So I think that's the line that we have to walk. I think it's important that people, for example, I would hope that folks know that I'm a Christian by who I am, how I act, and I think that's important. But I also don't believe that other folks have to be Christian.
No,
I'm
not saying that.
I want to be tolerant of those. I think it's important that folks have something in terms of spirituality. That's the key for me. So I encourage folks to find something, and if they've found something, then that's great. There's no one shoe that fits all.
So tell us, at the First Congregational Church, what where is it located, and where is it? What are the hours of the services?
Well, First Congregational Church, United Church of Christ, is at 880 Western Avenue in West Brattleboro. Our services are at 10 a.m. on Sunday morning, and we certainly are a congregation that is encouraging of folks to come regardless of where they are on their spiritual journey, and we welcome them.
Okay. And we also, the sermons are taped and they are shown on BCTV during the week. And so we've taken those steps to let people know what we're doing out there.
And we encourage people to listen.
Yeah.
If that's more of what you're looking for, come join us.
Yeah. Okay. And we thank you. We thank you very much, Reverend Joe Amico, for sharing with us.
And thank you, Lynn, for having me.
Yeah. And we thank you for watching. You've been watching Neighbor to Neighbor. My name is Lynn Coram. I've been here with the Reverend Joe Amico, pastor of the First Congregational Church in West Brattleboro. And we thank you for watching and have a good day.